Starting off today, we will have wonderful, my good friend, Crystal Tate from WEHA. She's the WEHA Training Operations and Logistics Manager. As we know, body art is becoming more and more popular with shops and procedures and new equipment popping up everywhere. So with this building or growing a sound regulatory program around this ever-evolving topic can be a challenge. So WEHA has developed some resources, and Crystal's going to be introducing those resources that have been around and are currently being developed by the National Environmental Health Association, Body Art Committee, and their partner organizations. New resources include inspector training, policy statements, and other inspector-focused resources. So I am going to turn this over to Crystal. If you do have questions, we do ask that you enter those into the chat box, and we will hold those questions until the end for Crystal to answer any pressing issues that you may have. So welcome, Crystal, and thank you for joining us from beautiful the Colorado area today.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm really excited to be here. I will warn you, we're in the middle of a huge windstorm. Last time that happened, some poles got knocked down, my internet went off. So if I disappear, that might be why. I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna put it out there so it doesn't happen and knock on some wood. That we're good. Should I go ahead and share my screen? All right. Let's see here. All right, looking good? Okay, great. Thanks again, Carrie. And thanks everyone for having me here today. As Carrie said, I am Crystal Tate, and I work at the National Environmental Health Association. I do work in training on the more operations side. However, in my past life at WEHA, I did some programmatic work, and one of those areas was body art. And for some reason, I just can't get rid of it. And I mean that with all the love in my heart. Body art is great, but no matter what I do at WEHA, it seems to just follow me around. But in this case, it's been great because in the department that I currently work in, which is training, it allows us to build some new resources around body art that I didn't necessarily have access to previously. So today we're going to be talking about body art regulations and inspections and some of the resources, like Carrie mentioned, that WEHA's been working on, and definitely our partner groups. This is all of these resources, creations. It's a team effort from day one, and it's a big industry and regulatory partnership. We get a lot of support from the majority of the industry. Of course, some industry would prefer no regulations at all, but we do collaborate and have built successful partnerships throughout the body art community. So what we've been working on has focused on building sound risk-based regulations and resources that help to support or build body art programs across the country. As Carrie mentioned, we have the WEHA Body Art Model Code. We have the new supporting annex, which was just released this spring, that provides the scientific background and justification for the regulations included in the model code. And really excited right now, we're working on an awareness level training program for inspectors. And I'll get more into that as we go along. So first, let's make sure we are using the same definition. What is body art? And this definition, as all definition, it's a little flexible. the current body art model code, which was released in 2019, has a body art definition as body piercing, tattooing, branding, scarification, or permanent cosmetics. And as far as flexible goes, the permanent cosmetics in that definition is a great example. That nomenclature has changed to cosmetic tattooing. I don't know if both are still in use in Wisconsin, but we see both across the country. And as we update the body art model code, we've got an effort going on to a change request to make that change, as well as an effort to not single out permanent cosmetics or cosmetic tattooing as a separate process from tattooing, because it is the same process, and considering them as separate or different is hindering regulations and inspections, and in some cases limits the training that is available to the professionals by how it's classified at the state level. Also, the term body art is sometimes used to describe the more extreme forms of body art, like performance body art, such as suspension. And then, of course, there's body modifications, such as implants under the skin, splitting the tongue, things like that. For the work that WEHA is focusing on right now, and for the purposes of this discussion, we're just going to stick with that more general, narrow definition of body art and not go into what's considered extreme, though some of the things we talk about might be considered extreme by some of you, which very well might be. So the lay of the land for body art, as you probably know, body art doesn't have a home at a federal agency right now. There's bits and pieces that are included in different agencies across the federal landscape, but for the most part, regulations are unique to each state. And if it's home rule, they're potentially unique to each jurisdiction. As of 2020, there are currently 3,143 counties and county equivalents in just the 50 states. That's not even the territories. And that means there's a lot of diverse regulations. There's no regulations, and there's outdated regulations. So there's a lot to work with here. In addition, like I just mentioned about permanent cosmetics, cosmetic tattooing, we have some states like Colorado, where I am, that don't allow health inspectors to do any type of inspection around cosmetic tattooing, because within Colorado, that falls under cosmetology at the state level. So really interesting situation regulatory wise, and not very uniform. I know a lot of people think the food code is diverse across the US. Body art, I think, has it beat by a few degrees. All right, so regulatory and industry partnership. I mentioned this earlier, and I want to really mention all of our partners and acknowledge and recognize the diverse group and the individuals that we are very fortunate to work with in the body art and regulatory fields. Without all of the participants, which are way too many to number individually, we wouldn't have such robust resources. And as you guys know, everything in environmental health works better through collaboration. And all of us, whether they're a regulator or a body artist, we work to protect public health. And for our work at WEHA, that is our mission and what guides our focus. So there are two groups under AFDO. We have the AFDO Body Art Committee and the Body Art Education Alliance, or BAEA. And the BAEA is a group that started work on the training program that we're going to talk about later. And they did that as a way to support regulators and adoption of sound regulations. We also have representatives from the Association of Professional Piercers and the Society of Permanent Cosmetic Professionals. And before you ask, they are the ones who are advocating for the change to cosmetic tattooing. and be included in tattooing. They want that change. They want to be considered body art. And I don't know if they're going to change their society or association name, but they are the ones that are advocating for it. So there's just a great example of how industry has a voice in all of these resources. So some of these groups involve both industry and regulatory. Some are more industry focused, obviously, with outreach and involvement in regulatory programs. And especially the one at the end, the body art compliance group, who works with regulators to develop sound regulations. So what have all these groups, all these partners done? Well, a lot. As we talked about, there's the WEHA Body Art Model Code, which first came out in 1998. I suppose there's some of you that maybe weren't born when this was released, but it was first released in 1998. Work started to update that in 2016, a little bit overdue, but that took almost 4 years, and the update was released in 2019. And it's about to undergo another update starting early next year. More information of that will be coming if you're interested in suggesting a change or reviewing that document. The AFTO Body Art Committee is creating guidelines around tattoo pigments. You probably know those aren't currently regulated at all. And new regulations that the EU put in place have created a lot of confusion and industry disenchantment with the regulatory process. So we really appreciate their work and creating those guidelines to protect public health. The Association of Professional Piercers, in case you weren't aware, they have a conference every year. This year's was last month, and health inspectors are allowed to attend at no cost. This is a great educational tool to learn more about the industry and the processes that they use. If you go to APP, I believe it's app.com, or just Google Association of Professional Piercers, you can find that information. Also, my information, my contact information is on the last slide, or Carrie has it. So please, if you have any questions about anything I talk about today, please reach out to me through Carrie or through my email, and I'm happy to answer your questions or get you connected with any of the variety of groups that I talk about. As Carrie mentioned, we've also done policy statements, and we found that they've been really useful in helping persuade boards of health to adopt certain regulations or to look at body art through a different lens. We just released a new one, which is more of an umbrella policy around body art and regulations. And there are two smaller ones focusing on treating the use of piercing guns the same as any other piercing with the same sanitation requirements. I'm sure that you've heard about the piercing guns being used at the small little mall stores and kiosks with carpeted floors and not necessarily ways to sanitize the area around. Even single-use equipment, there's still no way to sanitize the gun that's used where the single use is inserted. There's also been a movement towards allowing more, non-traditional, non-earlobe piercing at kiosks in malls as a way to drive traffic back into malls, which is kind of interesting. And again, we go back to those are the same requirements for those facilities being applied as are being applied to standalone facilities. Again, our main concern is protecting public health, and we feel like we really need to treat everything the same way, whether it's piercing guns or the other smaller policy statement is about microblading, to make sure that's included with cosmetic tattooing or tattooing, however the local regulations have that parsed out. And again, requiring the same sanitation requirements and inspections and licensing requirements for that procedure. The last group that I mentioned on the previous slide, the body art compliance group, and others that are part of our committees, work with jurisdictions across the country to help develop or update regulations and compliance processes, and also to help gather input from industry so everybody feels like they have a voice in the regulations that are being developed. So some upcoming fun things. Again, I mentioned the inspector training. We're hoping to debut that at the June AEC, and it'll be an awareness level basic inspector training. We're also hoping to move that online. The BAEA is coming out with a model inspection form to support the training, to provide some standardization to train to, and also a resource sharing platform. We know that a lot of you out there have created great work around body art, and we want to make sure there's a way that we can share that great work with each other. It's so much easier to modify what's already been created or make the changes needed by your jurisdiction than basically recreate the wheel from scratch. Again, you know, as we noted, there's not a lot of federal dollars, if any, coming into the body art programs. You know, we heard from a lot of jurisdictions that they don't even do inspections in their jurisdiction on body art facilities. So this is something that's meant to maximize what dollars are available for jurisdictions. So protecting public health, that's why we're all here, right? And we all know there are sometimes when inspections or inspectors are viewed as adversarial and out to get the owner or the operator. And I'm sure all of you have experienced this sometime. From our work and our projects, we focus on the protection of public health, whether that is the worker safety or the client safety. We're all in this together. We're communicating risk and precautions. We're developing risk-based regulations and inspection processes that protect public health universally. And that's a big part of our industry involvement too. They want to protect worker safety and themselves too. I'm not sure that that totally alleviates the adversarialness of the inspection process, but all of our materials are created in a way to promote education, communication, and outreach, and collaboration and partnership in the inspection and body art regulation process. And I do bring this up because we do get inquiries about the different, what we consider and what we're talking about today, the basic forms of body art. And sometimes there is just a bias towards people who enjoy body art, whether they're a practitioner or an enthusiast that has body art. And the fact is that we aren't here to judge or regulate something out of existence because it isn't to our taste. We always work together to protect public health so that these practices can be done safely. And for our body artist partners, they're so up to speed on a lot of the best public health practices, and we've learned a lot from them. So we're all in this together. It's not meant to be judgmental. It's not how we approach our regulations or our resources. It's meant to protect both the worker and the client, and just public health in general. So as we're going, the development of the training process, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that the BAEA initiated a few years ago, and they've gathered a lot of information, a lot, and a lot of levels of information, right? Because there's kind of an awareness level, what's involved in body art, and then there's a more complex, deeper operations level, and maybe more of a management partnership level where you're building a body art program. So there's lots of levels of information. there's a lot, as we talked about, there's a lot of varying regulation, varying practices, both in procedures and inspections. So WEHA and the Body Art Education Alliance are partnering to organize the information into a series of courses, starting again with the awareness level, with the intent to develop those 3 levels of training: awareness, operations, and management, program building. The first part of organizing that information, it is a lot of information, is finding out what inspectors need in regards to body art. Whoops, there we go. So we did a needs assessment, and we utilized the model code, the body art model code, as a standardizer for this training. And we used it in this needs assessment. So similar to using the FDA food code to train food safety, but knowing that jurisdictions probably may have their own code language. The training is based on the why something needs to be done, whether that's risk-based or protecting public health versus the exact code language. So why do things need to be done the way they're done? Environmental health professionals told us about their training around body art facility inspections and what areas they felt they needed more training in and what areas they needed less. And these are rough highlights that I'm going to cover. The full report will be published soon. And some of these, I think you can guess, environmental health professionals probably don't need training on hand washing unless it's maybe their very first day. From our needs assessment, that's a pretty comfortable area. But the next ones, they really could use some more information, some training on jewelry standards, the procedure setup, especially the less common forms of body art, and consent forms. And consent forms, while it seems so innocent, it's a form, right? It's got its own set of issues around those. So for jewelry and jewelry standards, there was a lot of discussion about that. What materials are okay? Mill certificates. What is a mill certificate? How can we find out more about this? And this is something that is hard for both the industry and for regulators, because right now, as it stands, and I think this is true in general for body art, there's not a lot of training that's easily accessible. And it doesn't always come from a resource that maybe you feel comfortable with. And that's definitely the case with jewelry standards. This is something new, new standards and new requirements. WEHA and the WEHA's Body Art Committee has been working with different experts to identify the best standards and the best way to check those standards for inspectors. So then we get into procedure setup. Setup for procedures vary between procedures, they vary between studios, they vary between artists. So we're covering what are the basics that need to be included and how do they need to be prepared and set up so that they remain sterile. We also get into the less common forms of body art, like this picture here is of scarification. We hear that that's something that's not in every community. And a lot of boards of health are reluctant to regulate it because there's not a lot of information about it. So we're hoping to develop some information and some training about these less common scarification and branding, not because we think that they should roll out across the country, but in an effort to protect public health. Whether our jurisdiction recognizes it or chooses not to, it probably still is happening somewhere around you. The last one we heard about that regulators would like to know more about is exposure control and infectious biomedical waste management plans. This one can be a hard one for facilities to implement unless they've had some training, and even then it can be hard. And that's why we require training for both operators and regulators around bloodborne pathogens and proper collection of sharps and contaminated equipment in the body art model code. A lot of times what we've heard is this is a case of environmental health professionals having the training, but just having an example of how to apply it to a body art facility. So they have the background, they have the understanding, they just need to see what it looks like in action. And sometimes what we hear is the inspectors need educational tools for the operators. Some operators are great and they've got these plans set up. Some don't necessarily come from the background that that's an easy thing to do. So developing templates and supporting documents, job aids, is something that's part of what we're doing with the initiative to support this training, so that you as the inspector, as you're going out, have some educational resources to help out shop owners who are trying to do their best but might not have access to the material they need. Like I mentioned, it's hard to find sometimes, and it also allows the formation of that partnership. We're working together. This is information I have that could help you, and chances are they have information that could help you as your role as an inspector. So last but definitely not least, consent forms. There are a lot of questions around consent forms, and consent forms can be difficult for both the inspector and the facility. And it involves potentially sensitive medical issues. So this is, it can get crazy really easy. So what we hear from operators is, and what we hear from regulators they're being asked is, what can be asked? What can we ask our potential clients? Obviously, there's some communicable diseases that could be shared through the body art procedure. So what are we allowed to ask, and what needs to be asked to protect both the client and the operator or the body artist? Where does HIPAA come in? I've heard a lot of different points of view on this. Body artists aren't medical personnel, so does HIPAA apply to them? I know California just put through a regulation around this. They've been trying for a while. I think the latest one was rescinded, or it didn't get approved. I need to follow up on that. But there is a lot of confusion around that. And not only once we get past the whole HIPAA issue, which scares, a lot of people these days, we've got storage and access. Is the operator responsible for storing these, and what precautions can be expected for them to take? There's a lot involved in consent forms. I actually feel like this is the one that's going to take us the longest to develop a resource around. So the next steps, like I mentioned, we're looking forward to developing more training after this awareness level. We'll start updating the WEHA Body Art Model Code in early 2022. So a new one, of an updated version, it usually takes us about 2 years to go through the change request, comment, review, and approval process, and then changing the code and printing it usually takes about 2 years. So early 2024, that should be done, hopefully sooner. We'll see how that goes. And then, like I've mentioned throughout, as we're building the training program, we see more and more, or we hear more and more about inspection job aids that would be useful for regulators, either to help them complete the inspection successfully or to help educate body artists and operators, shop operators. And we're really looking forward to developing those two as kind of the fun part of it all. So questions. Here's my contact information. Also, I added the AFTO Body Art Committee and BAEA co-chairs information. Feel free to reach out to her directly. She knows that I'm sharing this with you. Or please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or would like to get involved or would like, introductions to any of the great people we work with.
All right, thank you so much, Crystal. What a great presentation and a lot of information. I know I haven't done a body art inspection in many years, but I would probably be looking for this information if I were to start going out and doing those types of inspections. I did also include Crystal's contact information in the chat. For those of you who don't know, if you would like to save the chat, you just click on the three buttons, the three little dots, and more will come up, and then you can save the chat. Any questions or any follow-up for Crystal on all that is body art and WEHA? I see no questions and no hands raised. So in Wisconsin, Crystal, our local health departments are doing those inspections, and then the Department of Safety and Professional Services are doing inspections in the state areas that aren't covered by locals. So I see we have a lot of those folks on here right now. So I'm guessing you're probably going to get some. Oh, Amber Kohlberg. Let's see here. Can you talk more on scarification? What exactly is it?
Sure, absolutely. So scarification is damaging the skin in a way to, in a pattern, so that the healing, the resulting scar creates a pattern, a raised scar on the skin. It's very similar to branding as far as the end result, but the methodology is just different, and the resulting scar, whether it's from a burn scar from branding or I don't want to say puncture wound, they basically remove the skin, so it's like a cut that results in a scar on your skin. So it's definitely more of a niche procedure in body art, but it is being done enough that we include it in the model code about what needs to be done. Obviously, there's a lot more risk involved, with the amount of blood and biomedical waste involved. Does that answer your question? And if they get anesthetized, like local, when they get that procedure, that's actually not allowed outside of some numbing cream. So when you see scarification, that's usually somebody going through that without any type of pain medication at all, which is impressive to me.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, and she said, yeah, she had just never heard of this type of body art before. Let's see. Will tattoo removal be included in this model code? Excellent question.
That is a great question. And at this point, that has not been suggested. We're looking more at body art facility inspections. And I think the removal's done more at some doctor's office, but now, laser shops are popping up left and right, at least it seems like in the Colorado community, laser aesthetics, and they do tattoo removing too. So I imagine, in the next wave, we'll probably see some problems around training and education with that. But right now it doesn't. You can always suggest that tattoo removal be included. I will say we are working on a public health communication template that does talk about the potential implications, public health outcomes from body art. And we do discuss that tattoo removal is not easy. And even if it may be possible, it may not be possible for the type of tattoo that you received or the ink that was used.
Yeah, and Jennifer's reply to that is, it's pretty sketchy with no one regulating this. So probably in the future that will have to be addressed.
I agree. I think one of the most eye-opening things that we discovered through the needs assessments and just talking to regulators across the country is how often jurisdictions, it's kind of that if we don't regulate it, it doesn't exist mindset, and that's not always the case. And it's better to have some type of regulation to protect public health than to let something happen in a dark room somewhere where there are no protocols to follow.
We'll take one more question here. Karen asked, will blood-borne pathogen certification be required in the new food code? She did state the majority of her studios really would like this to be the case.
Yeah, we do advocate that requirement, that training for both the body artist and for inspectors. Absolutely. There is a little bit of that kind of shift that I talked about of receiving training and not necessarily knowing how it applies to body art. There is some body art specific bloodborne certification training available in certain jurisdictions. But we are talking to them about maybe making something available online, because body art specific training can be really hard to find.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Crystal, for joining us today. The webinar was recorded, so we will provide a link for the recording to those of who were not able to make it or would like to go through and review it again. It's been a great webinar presentation, and the next webinar will be in January. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Carrie.